So is it good to start? Okay, so Ryan's giving me the thumbs up to start. So I will cue you when it's your time to speak, person online. So this is Andrea Massari. He is the librettist for the opera that you are about to listen to. And these are colleagues and students, and that's all. Yeah, colleagues and students, friends. So let me say some things about this work. So first off, background on Boniface, or St. Boniface, I should say. St. Boniface was an English Benedictine monk who lived from 675 to 754 AD in the Middle Ages. He was a missionary in the Germanic parts of the Frankish kingdom in the 8th century, and he's perhaps most well known for chopping down the sacred oak of a group of pagans in what is now the German state of Hesse, which you can see transpiring behind me. Now for some background on the genesis of the opera, I had for a while been interested in St. Boniface going back to my youth, considering that he is the patron saint of Germany. And for those who don't know, I am half German because my mother is from there. Now, in addition to being raised Roman Catholic, I was also raised to develop a deep fondness and appreciation for the natural world. Within that context, something never quite sat right with me with Boniface's chopping down of the sacred oak tree of the pagans. It struck me as coercive and domineering, not just in the attempt to convert the pagans, but in the destruction of what I presume to have been an ancient and magnificent oak tree. Which, side note, is why I am thankful that Houstonians are so protective of our live oak trees that we have here in our own neighborhoods. I have composed music since I was a teenager, but had not considered writing an opera until sometime in 2019, when I imagined having a conversation with Russian opera composer Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. In this imagined conversation, basically a conversation I was having with myself, but we'll just move on. I asked him what he thought if I wrote a book about one of my favorite operas of his, The Legend of the Invisible City of Kitesh. Based on everything I have learned about Rimsky-Korsakov as a person, I believed his response to me would be, instead of writing a book about my opera, why don't you write your own opera? And so, through this perhaps silly thought experiment, I suddenly felt motivated to do just that. I have written music before incorporating Catholic themes and styles and incorporating pagan themes and styles in different works, which perhaps not coincidentally Rimsky-Korsakov did in his music as well. And I thought, why not marry the two? And so the idea for writing an opera on St. Boniface's encounter with the Germanic pagans was born. I also want to add that I was deeply inspired by the Met's 2019 production of Philip Glass's Akhenaten, as Akhenaten has for a long time been one of my all-time favorite operas, and the religious themes in that work were an additional source of motivation to tackle religious and sacred themes in an opera of my own. Wanting to write the music of an opera, of course, was only the starting point because I needed a libretto. My friend Andrea Massari from graduate school, a physics PhD and poet originally from Parma, Italy, had written poems inspired by my musical works that I had written in the past, and so he was a natural choice. I pitched the idea, we did our own research on Boniface and his time period, we convened to iron out major plot points and structural elements, and he set to work on the opera's text. We both agreed early on that we did not want the work to favor one side over the other, but rather to tell the story of both sides. We also took creative license in giving Boniface additional incentive for chopping down the oak tree beyond purposes of religious conversion alone, and in portraying a certain degree of inner conflict and remorse within Boniface for some of his actions. In the course of writing the music for the opera, I felt additionally inspired through my studies of 19th century German operas set in the Middle Ages, which was the topic of my PhD dissertation and later my book. And I do make a few references to some 19th century German medievalist operas. One is in the prologue to Act 1, which is the first video we will hear. You will hear a moment of silence followed by a jarringly dissonant chord in the organ. This chord is a dominant ninth, and this was the chord that Robert Schumann used to begin his the overture to his opera Genoveva from 1850. And later in Act 1, when Boniface and his monks arrive in Germany, the open organ plays a theme that is meant to mimic the horn call motive of the character Siegfried from The Ring Cycle by Richard Wagner, the opera Tetralogy by Wagner. The reference is both an homage to Wagner and a somewhat tongue-in-cheek depiction of stereotypically German hunting horn or folk music. Lastly, something occurs at the very end of the opera that is in part a reference to a similar occurrence in another opera by Wagner, but I will not disclose that until the end so as not to give any spoilers away. But pay attention at the very end to see if you can catch some obscure reference to some Wagner opera. Now, to address some of the religious themes of the work, which I've already somewhat discussed, particularly the moment I just mentioned at the very end of the opera, I can see how some people might view some of the events in the work as intended perhaps to be sacrilegious, or perhaps even to suggest that one faith wins over the other faith in the end. People, of course, are free to interpret the opera as they see it, and any good art should be malleable enough to accommodate different interpretations. But speaking from a place of artistic intent, or from a place of my own interpretation of the work, the goal was neither to be sacrilegious, nor to imply that one faith wins. Rather, and I'm thinking in particular about what happens at the end of the work, the goal was to express renewed hope for a peaceful and harmonious coexistence among the multitude of faith traditions that continue to thrive on planet Earth, and that millions of people live out with amicable and respectful sincerity and love. Now, I will soon hand the floor over to Andrea Massari, and he'll say a few words. But I do want to say some logistical things first. So the music you will hear comes from electronic MIDI tracks meant to simulate real instruments and voices that I made through my composition software. And you will be able to follow the libretto and various plot events through the lyrics on the screen. The text on the screen will explain everything, and I tried to have it up for long enough so that you could read everything, but you know, just do your best to follow along, and hopefully, if you don't get everything, you'll get the gist. And in addition to Andrea's libretto, we further incorporated several historical texts from the Middle Ages, including a Latin prayer, which Boniface sings as he is chopping the sacred oak, and the two Merseburg charms. The Merseburg charms were actual prayers of the medieval Germanic pagans that were written down and preserved. I also quote the music of the medieval polyphonic chant Sancte Boniface Martyr, which means St. Boniface Martyr, and is conveniently enough the earliest example of a notated polyphonic piece for practical use that was documented in the early 10th century AD. Very convenient, right? It's about Boniface, so I said, it's going in, it's going in. And the text on screen will point out the Merseburg charms and this polyphonic chant when they appear. Roman Catholic liturgical texts are set to my own original music of the opera as well, including the Kyrie eleison, the Gloria, the Sanctus, and the Agnus Dei. The piece is divided up into 9 YouTube videos, and the total runtime is about 46 minutes, although the runtime may vary for a live performance. The instrumentation includes violin, cello, harp, organ, various percussion instruments, and voice. There is also a spoken narrator part, which I recorded myself speaking, and which you will hear through these videos. Due to the instrumentation and the length of the work, the opera may appropriately be referred to as a chamber opera, or an opera of reduced length that does not contain full orchestral accompaniment. The opera mainly takes place in England and in Germany in the 8th century AD, and the same image you will see in each of these videos comes from the 1834 painting Boniface Fells the Donar Oak by German painter Heinrich Maria von Hesse. There are 2 acts in the work, but we will watch the entire thing straight through without a break. Now, I am handing the floor to Andrea. Hold the microphone so you can hear it better.
Wonderful. I hope you can hear me. Michael has said most of what I was going to say. I was intrigued by the idea that Michael gave me, that presented to me, of writing something for with the history of the story of Boniface's life. I think it's intriguing on the one hand from a historical point of view. This is a time in history that we have very little documents from. just told you that we have the first, some of the first polyphonic examples from, shortly following that period of time. So it's a very dark, really sort of the Dark Ages, right, what we call in history, and that because most of what we have is very, purified lives of saints that might seem to us that these people were sort of caricature and what I call hollow halos, but they were real people, right? And so the first thing that intrigued me is, okay, can we give these people a life? So that's why I inserted a moment of a dream for Boniface where he thinks he remembers of being a child. And then also, what did he think, like as a person, and not just him, but also I guess the other people around him, but what did he think about being a man of power, a scholar from England, and being sent to preach among the Germans? Did he think of them as uncivilized barbarians, something to conquer for the Pope or the King? Or did he identify it all? Well, he was, he spoke Old English natively, not very different from Old Saxon or Old Frisian that these people were speaking at the time. Was there some internal turmoil, as Michael was saying? And for sure I hope so. And that's why we put that in the opera with a lot of latitude, I guess. But the other thing is, Boniface to me is also a puppet show of history. And that's where the narrator comes in. The narrator is there mostly because I didn't want to show in a small short opera all that information that is needed as a context, right, to understand the action. And instead, I opted for the telling. But the narrator then takes a life of its own. And so he takes part in the action by providing sort of the main villain, if you will, of the story, the task and weapon to do something, you see. And then at the end, to conclude the opera by sort of like, as a sort of a stable, unfazed figure that went through it and is still there now, and in fact claims to be the person who's rolling around the wheel of history. And so, who is this person? And we do give them a name, I guess during we call him Luke, because he answers a prayer that was addressed to Luke. But the truth is that it's unclear what is the power that really this person is. Is them, who is he the person who directs history really, or is it just sort of like a passive steward? So I don't know. We don't want to give this a specific interpretation here. We'd like you to provide some interpretations. I paid attention mostly to the dramatic effects. But I do want it to come through that, these people are real people that are dragged along by the larger, this intimidating scheme of history. And through this scheme, souls and ideas are crushed and recycled. And that takes away from our agency and understanding, but I think it still preserves much of life's beauty. Thank you. And I wanted to add, very quickly, that I might disappear or not because I do have a day job which I'll keep. But if for any reason I'm not there, I will answer questions through Michael.
Okay. Thank you. That was the pagan hymn from the Epimac 1 that they sang. So that was derived from the original. It had evolved over time, but it was based on the original melody because in the Sanctus he had taught them the words of Sanctus to their melody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was showing it was like, continuing throughout.
So the other question that I had is that it seemed to me that the only truly joyful music that I heard through the whole time was when Boniface first came. Mm-hmm. But once he started talking to them, it was like he missed the mark. He wasn't able to give what he had. What he had was absorbed into their kind of dirgy sorrow. But there was that one moment when it seemed really happy. Is that something that?
Well, the round dance around the oak tree, was that not happy?
That was the pagan happy dance. Probably it was mixed up in there in my head.
Okay, yeah, because that was supposed to be happy also.
I like the the pagan song at the beginning being corrupted into the Christian version later by Boniface. I thought that tied it together for me in a circle. The pagan story is really what's being illustrated here, in my opinion.
Okay.
To Boniface, it's all some weird nightmare, some weird dream that he has to go through. So this is I found a lot of sympathy for the pagans when I was watching it.
Well, and that was to some extent the idea, because we don't often hear the pagan side of the story when we talk about the history, right? So we did want to kind of show that like human side.
And another thing, so Boniface will be chopping the tree in rhythm to the drum beat, correct?
Correct. Every chop was with that beat. Right?
I found that to be incredibly interesting drama, and I love tying action to the music like that in operas and stuff like that. That was an incredibly effective moment of drama for me. It was just incredibly effective.
In that moment, he was giving like the Creed,
Yeah.
but he was violently killing their faith.
Right. Yeah. That's a good observation, right? Yeah, and I think that was kind of the idea that this was kind of an act of violence. Did anyone catch the reference at the end? To the
I did not catch it.
So when the crucifix sprouts leaves, right? So that is a reference to the end of Richard Wagner's Tannhäuser, his 1845 opera, because in Tannhäuser, the Pope declares that Tannhäuser had no more chance of redemption than his papal staff had of sprouting leaves. And in the end of the opera, the papal staff miraculously sprouts leaves, signaling Tannhäuser's redemption.
That's great.
So I was thinking of it kind of as a reference to that, and also this idea of redemption. And redemption in a way for both sides, if that makes sense, you know, because both sides kind of messed up because they killed Boniface, you know. I mean, maybe it's not great that he chopped on a tree, but he also shouldn't kill in retaliation, right? And as a side note to that, we don't actually know, Boniface was killed by a band of thieves. We don't know if they were pagans retaliating or if it was unconnected, but for this story, we connected the two to have that kind of dramatic narrative going on. I just want to get that historical background. Yeah.
I also like you directly represented the Rhine, not just Germany, but the Rhine.
Yeah, that was Andrea, yeah.
Yeah, I felt the music showing us different pieces of the landscape as Boniface.
He was just saying that he liked the Rhine being referenced because it was like something specific and tangible to the German landscape.
And then it tied back to Boniface's blood being spilled, and I heard the music reference that first Rhine motif with he fell into the Rhine.
Yeah, right.
It was good. Really great dramatic writing.
Yeah.
On both ends.
Oh yeah, he's
Both of them. No, that was
he's the talent. So, any other questions? Yeah.
I found very interesting the beginning of the overture, am I right? The
Monologue.
Yeah, and the sequence is like a mass, am I correct? Like,
correct. That was also the idea, that we're showing the basic structures of the mass and the basic time length of the mass too.
Oh.
It was like a movement, yeah. Everything is connected.
Right.
That's what it's phenomenal.
And at the end, finishing in another day, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we wanted it.
Fast.
Right. We wanted to all be kind of tied together. And there's also a motif of two. Boniface and the priestess, two faiths, two acts, composer, librettist. You know, there's lots of that kind of motif.
It's a highly dual opera.
A highly dual opera, yes. Andrea, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I'm so happy you guys are here. And
Obviously.
Yeah.
love to hear feedback and hear everything that I will listen to the recording. But,
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We're both appreciative that you guys took time out of your day to come and listen and read, and we